Hi guys, what we have here is the last lecture of this unit. After this, we'll prepare to take an exam on Units 1 and Unit 2. If you have any questions, make sure to write them down and bring them to me as soon as possible so that I can answer them before the exam. Today we're talking about population geography, and which is how geographers study the world as far as where people live and how many people live there and at what rate they are increasing or decreasing in population, right? What I do have here is a political cartoon, and the cartoon is showing population growth over the past 2,000 years. So if we look at this, which statement best describes this illustration that we see here? Well, would you say that human population has decreased gradually since 1800? Or would you say that human population has increased gradually since 1800? Would you say that human population has decreased rapidly since 1800, or that it has increased rapidly since 1800? Sorry. And so the answer is D. Right. While we could probably look at the chart and agree that population is increasing, we need to look at the words gradually and rapidly. So gradually would mean a slow change, a small change. But if we're looking at 1800, it's not a gradual change anymore. You have a rapid change, and the train is having a hard time keeping up with how rapid that change was, right? So the answer is D. Okay, so let's talk about population distribution. And this is a definition that you should know. That's the variations in population that occur across a country, in a continent, or the world. Right? Almost everyone on Earth lives on a very small portion of the Earth's land, because not all of the Earth's land are places that are good for sustaining a population. Those populations tend to live in places where there is fertile soil, where food can be grown, also where they have access to water for drinking or trade, and they'll tend to be living in places that have a good climate. Okay? The map that we see here shows you the habitable zones of the Earth. These are the places that can support a population. Zones that are in the dark green tend to be warmer, have a lot of agricultural activity, and then you have them as less desirable ones are going to be in the lighter color. This is obviously ice. Antarctica is completely white because obviously that's frozen ground. So the lighter the color, the less likely there is population there, right? Okay, so we talk about how population is distributed throughout the world. We also need to consider population density. And population density is the average number of people that are living on a particular amount of land, either a square mile or a square kilometer. That's how it's measured. And what they do is they take the entire population of a country and they divide it by the land area. And so that tells you on average how many people live in per area, per square mile or per square kilometer. Europe and Asia are the most populated continents on the planet, and they have more than 60% of the world's population living on just those two continents, and they're not even the biggest. Earth's population is moving all the time, and they move in great numbers. For instance, through migration, they go to cities. They move from rural villages, they migrate to cities, and this is called urbanization, the cities that are getting bigger. About half of the world's population today lives in cities. People also move between countries, and we call that emigration and immigration. And we'll talk about those in more detail when we cover North America. But just to give you that heads up, emigration is what we call when someone leaves a country, and immigration is when someone enters a country. Okay, we'll discuss those in more detail, and I'll provide lots of examples. All right, so this map here shows you population density. The dark purple areas are places where there's a lot of crowding, where a lot of people live in small areas. So you can see India is actually the most populated country on the planet, and China is close second. You can see that they're very, very dark purple. And then in the North America, you can tell that most people live in the eastern parts of the country. Some other important definitions that you need to know in order to understand what we're going to talk about when we cover population pyramids. You have birth rate, which is the number of births per year for every 1,000 people. So geographers look at how many people are being born every year by studying the birth rate. Geographers will also look, or demographers will look at death rate, and that is the number of deaths per year for every 1,000 people. Right? And both of these things will tell you what the natural increase of a country is. That's the growth rate of a population. And what they do is they take the number of people that were born and they subtract the number of people who died. And that number, if it's positive, means that the population is increasing at that rate. If the number is negative, then that means that the population is getting smaller because more people are dying than there are being born. Right? Geographers sometimes will organize this information into a graph called a population pyramid. And that's a diagram that's going to show the distribution of population by age and also by gender. So it'll show you males and females. And I'll show you examples. Right? So if we look at this population pyramid from 2014 in the United States, what group does this graph where would you fall in this graph? What age group? So in 2014, you're probably about 14 years old. So you would fall somewhere along these lines. If you're a female, you'd be in the pink side. If you're male, you'd be in the blue side. Right? So this is what a population pyramid would look like. All right. Again, it's a visual representation of the population of a country. It's a graph that's going to show both age and gender. And it shows a number. It shows numbers or proportions of males and females in each age group, so you can see the differences between both. And it reflects the birth rate and the death rate of a country. So by looking at population pyramids, we can tell a lot about what's happening with their birth rate and death rate. It's going to reflect whether a population is growing or declining. Right? In your notes, you have a blank page like this one, where you need to label the parts of the population pyramid. So we'll do that together. First, let's look at the numbers in the middle, and just know that these represent ages, and we write those down in increments of 5. So from 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, and so on. Okay. At the top, you're going to have the name of the country and the year, which is being represented in this graph. You have the labels of male and female as well. The female population, again, is shown on the right side. The male population is shown on the left. And then you have the numbers at the bottom, right? This x-axis. And the x-axis is the total number of people. Sometimes it's seen in a percentage in that population, and it's represented in the thousands, right? So make sure you label all these parts of the population pyramid. All right. So if we look at the population pyramid of a less developed nation, it's going to take this shape here. Usually you're going to see that, like in a country like Nigeria in 1995, they had a very high birth rate, but children aren't living very long because you can see it decreases rapidly from 10 to half of that, right? So half of the infants died by the time they turned 5. Okay, and so this is usually very common in a less developed country. So when we look at population pyramids, if they have a triangle shape like the one that we just saw, that means that there's going to be a very high birth rate and a very high death rate. There's a high infant mortality rate as well. Children under 1 will die at a higher rate than in developed nations. And also it means that they have a low gross domestic product. That means that they're not producing a lot of things in their country. And this sometimes means that there is a low quality of life. They don't have access to health care. They might have inadequate food supply or poor water supply. And so this is why the population is not doing well. right? If you're looking at the population of a developed nation like the one that we see here, it has a bit of a different shape. It's almost diamond-like. And this is the population pyramid of Sweden in 1995. So you can see that in the working class that are the ones that, this middle age group are the ones that are a little bit bigger. And then you have a balance of both young and old people. Okay. When you're looking at a diamond-shaped population pyramid like the one that we just saw, that means that the country has a low birth rate and also a low death rate. That is going to mean that they also have a low infant mortality rate, which usually means they have a high GDP. They're producing a lot of things in this country, so they're pretty wealthy. There's going to be a higher quality of life. They will have access to healthcare, plenty of food to eat, and good quality water to drink. Right. In your journals, if you could use this information to practice drawing a population pyramid, that would be great practice to help you familiarize yourself with the parts of the pyramid. We did that in class, but if you are welcome to try and do it, just pause the video, look at this information, and draw one and see if you can come up with a similar pyramid like the ones that we have already seen. Okay. And then this is another really interesting way to look at population pyramids, because they tell you things about communities. Okay, I'm just going to move on to the next slide to explain to you. All right, so if we're looking at the upper class and middle class suburb in Bellevue, Washington, it's going to look a lot like a diamond shape, right? So you have the working class, that middle class is going to be the biggest, and then they tend not to have a whole lot of children, so that's why the birth rate is a little bit smaller, and then they have an average death rate. If you look at a college community like in Northfield, Minnesota, you see that there's a very strange shape, and that is because this represents the college kids that attend university in this community. So, they move for education for a few years, but they are counted as part of the population. And so you're going to see that there's a big difference in the rest of the population for that age group. If you're looking at an area that has a military base, that's why you see a spike on the left side, which represents the males. Most of the military is composed of men, and so there's still even a spike in women, but the majority are men. And men in this age bracket, in their 20s, maybe 30s, you'd see a spike in that because they move there to perform this job. And if you look at a retirement area, for instance, like in Bella Vista, Arkansas, well, a lot of people of the higher age brackets are going to live here. So you'll see that the population is kind of distorted because there's more people living in this area because they go here to retire. Right? So we can see a lot of things from looking at these population pyramids and their interesting shapes. All right, so another thing that population pyramids will tell us is how historical events have affected the population. So if, for instance, you take into consideration World War I between 1914 and 1918, there were 1.7 million military members who died during this time period. Now, those are going to be men that are anywhere between 16 to maybe 30 years old in this time period. So if we looked at a population pyramid from 70 years later, we'll notice that there's a huge decline in the people that are in their 70s and 80s compared to women, right? There's less men. And that is because a lot of the men died 70 years earlier in the in World War I. So you can see how historical events also shape populations and how they affect populations in the future. All right, it's very interesting to look at these. Finally, you have an activity for to do. So the prompt here, it's a journal that you need to write, is that Marvin the Martian just received a population pyramid, but he does not know how to read it. So write a letter to Marvin and explain to him how to interpret a population pyramid. Right? Make sure you use that graph where you labeled all the components of the pyramid and tell them the difference between a diamond and a triangle-shaped pyramid and what that means for the country that it represents. Okay? If you have any questions, like I said, feel free to ask me, and thanks for watching.